They laughed when she wore boots to graduation. Sarah knew the whispers, the mocking smiles, the judgment. What kind of girl dares to defy tradition on her big day with worn-out military boots? This was more than just a fashion statement. It was a silent tribute, a heavy burden, a memory clutched tight. But no one was laughing when the ground began to tremble. No one was laughing when a massive Chinook helicopter appeared, looming directly behind the stage. Get ready for a story where one girl's quiet act of remembrance turns a day of celebration into an unforgettable revelation. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Biker. The dawn of graduation day, typically a symphony of joyful anticipation and the sweet promise of new beginnings, cast a strangely heavy pall over Sarah. Sunlight, usually a beacon of hope, instead filtered through the auditorium's grand arched windows, stretching long, distorted shadows across the rows of pristine white gowns that hung like silent, expectant ghosts. This day, for most, was the triumphant crescendo of 12 arduous years, a medley of late-night study sessions, fueled by lukewarm coffee and cold pizza, whispered secrets during passing periods, and the occasional exhilarating brush with teenage rebellion. It was a day of exhilarating relief, electric excitement, and perhaps a tiny, fluttering tremor of fear for the vast, uncharted expanse of the future. For Sarah, however, it was a profound battle, a quiet yet relentless internal war she was forced to wage anew every single year on this precise date, a conflict amplified 1,000-fold by the very public, scrutinizing spectacle that lay ahead. It was a solitary campaign, one she had to face armed only with the fragile shield of memory and the unyielding blade of defiance. Beneath the flowing, almost ethereal drapery of her immaculate white graduation gown, Sarah wore them, the boots, not the delicate flats that would whisper politely against the polished linoleum, nor the elegant heels that would announce their wearer's confident stride with a series of sharp, rhythmic clicks. These were her father's combat boots. They bore the undeniable marks of a life fully lived, a duty unflinchingly served. Worn and scuffed in countless places where the rugged leather had grappled with unforgiving terrain, they carried the faded scars of patrols on foreign soil, places Sarah could only conjure in her imagination from faded photographs and hushed stories. Yet, in their raw, unvarnished truth, they stood as an audacious, almost brazen defiance of the unspoken, almost sacred dress code that governed this solemn celebratory occasion. The leather, once rigid and unyielding, was now softened by years of arduous use, molded to a foot much larger than her own. Still, paradoxically, they felt like a second skin, a tangible extension of herself, a comforting, almost paternal weight that grounded her. In a world that often spun too fast, too chaotically for her to grasp, threatening to unmoor her from the anchor of reality. The laces, frayed in places where they had been pulled tight hundreds of times, were meticulously tied in a precise, almost ceremonial military knot, a small, intimate detail only she, and perhaps a handful of others who truly understood, would notice. It was a silent testament to the man who once laced them up with purpose, ready for whatever the day demanded. As she navigated the bustling rows, a low hum of chatter filled the auditorium, punctuated by bursts of laughter and excited exclamations. But as Sarah moved, the soundscape around her subtly shifted. Whispers started almost immediately. They didn't erupt in a sudden clamor, they rippled, like an icy current stealthily invading a warm stream, chilling the air around her, isolating her even amidst the throngs of her peers. "Is she seriously wearing those?" a voice hissed, laced with a potent cocktail of disbelief and barely concealed disgust. Sarah didn't need to crane her neck, didn't need to see the perfectly made-up face to know the voice belonged to Jessica. Jessica, the unofficial queen of Lincoln High's social hierarchy, whose voice possessed an almost unnatural ability to slice through the ambient noise, precise and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. Jessica's impeccably styled blonde hair, cascading in artful waves down her back, and her designer dress, shimmering subtly under the fluorescent lights, were the very embodiment of graduation chic, a carefully constructed facade of effortless perfection. And Sarah's boots, in their raw, honest truth, were a direct, unashamed affront to Jessica's meticulously curated, superficial world. To graduation? Another voice, Chloe Martinez, Jessica's ever-present shadow, echoed with a theatrical gasp that was less about genuine surprise and more about broadcasting her disdain. Her voice, usually a quiet murmur behind Jessica, now carried with an exaggerated disbelief, ensuring every ear within a 10-foot radius caught the full biting effect of her feigned shock. "I mean, honestly," she continued, tilting her head with an air of profound confusion, as if Sarah's choice was an unsolvable riddle, "it's not even Halloween." Is she seriously trying to be edgy or make some kind of profound statement on a day that's supposed to be about dignity and tradition? Like, just look at her. It's so much, so profoundly, obviously desperate for attention, wouldn't you say? It screams, "Look at me," in the most unbecoming way possible, completely out of sync with everything this day represents. Phones appeared as if by magic, materializing from pockets and purses, their screens lighting up faces in the dimming auditorium like tiny malevolent constellations, each pixel a point of judgment. A girl across the aisle subtly raised hers, pretending to scroll through a social media feed, while the camera, angled just so, captured Sarah's boots in all their scuffed, defiant glory. Sarah could almost feel the phantom digital clicks, hear the silent tap-tap-tapping of rapid-fire typing, crafting captions designed to sting, to mock, to humiliate wannabe soldier girl to grad, #epic fail, #identity crisis, #Lincoln High. Each notification, she imagined, was a tiny, invisible pinprick, each fleeting, contemptuous glance adding to the growing, suffocating discomfort in her chest. She adjusted the heavy, almost suffocating fabric of her gown, trying to somehow shrink, to disappear, to dissolve into the anonymous rows of identical white robes. But the boots, solid and undeniably present, seemed to anchor her, refusing to let her vanish. They echoed against the polished linoleum floor as she walked towards her assigned row, each step a deliberate, resonant statement, a thunderclap of raw grief and quiet courage in a vast, indifferent sea of soft-soled shoes. The morning unfolded with an agonizing slowness, each minute stretching into an eternity under the crushing weight of silent judgment. During the pre-ceremony rehearsal held in the cavernous gymnasium, where years of boisterous basketball games and enthusiastic pep rallies had left an indelible scent of sweat and triumph, the mockery escalated from whispers to open taunts. This was where the entire graduating class assembled, a swirling vortex of nervous energy, youthful exuberance, and nascent adult anxieties. Mark Jensen, the football team's quarterback, whose ego was somehow more expansive and formidable than his already considerable physical frame, and Jessica's equally obnoxious male counterpart, spotted Sarah navigating the crowded floor. He nudged his hulking teammates with a conspiratorial smirk. "Hey, soldier girl!" he called out, his voice booming across the echoing gym, instantly drawing the attention of dozens, if not hundreds, of curious onlookers. He exaggerated a stiff, almost comical marching walk, lifting his knees comically high, like a poorly trained recruit struggling to maintain formation. Left, right, left, right! Anyone seen her deployment papers?" Pretty sure Operation Graduation doesn't require combat gear unless she's planning a solo mission to the snack bar. His friends snickered, their faces twisting into exaggerated grimaces of feigned respect as they offered mock salutes with theatrical precision. "Ten Hut!" one yelled, loud enough to make heads turn across the gym. "We've got a real G.I. Jane here, boys. Report for duty." The laughter that followed felt not like a mere sound, but like a tangible physical assault. 1,000 tiny needles pricking against Sarah's exposed skin, 1,000 tiny cuts designed to bleed her dry of dignity, to strip away her resolve layer by excruciating layer. It was a concerted effort to dismantle her piece by agonizing piece. But she kept walking, her spine rigidly straight, her shoulders squared, her eyes fixed forward on the makeshift stage, a singular point of focus in the swirling chaos of adolescent cruelty. She'd learned long ago through bitter, scarring experience that showing weakness, showing even a flicker of pain, only fueled their fire, only gave them more ammunition, more reason to persist in their relentless torment. The oversized boots, while familiar and profoundly comforting in their symbolic weight, paradoxically made the simple act of navigating the crowded gym floor feel cumbersome, almost awkward. Each step was a deliberate, almost agonizing effort to maintain her composure, to not stumble, to not fall under the relentless glare of their ridicule. The faint, earthy scent of her father's cologne, still clinging stubbornly to the worn leather despite countless attempts to air them out, was a detail that both comforted and broke her heart every single time she wore them. It was a tangible link to a love tragically lost. A silent conversation only she could hear, a phantom touch that she yearned for but knew she could never truly reclaim. She had transferred to Lincoln High just 2 months ago, abruptly thrown into the chaotic, high-stakes final semester of senior year. A senior starting over in a new town, a new life, forced to forge a new identity she hadn't asked for nor desired. Her mother, still reeling from the profound, soul-crushing loss of her husband, had remarried Robert, a kind but quiet insurance man whose gentle demeanor and steady presence offered a fragile, much-needed sense of stability. The move, miles away from everything familiar, from every ghost of a memory, had been necessary, almost desperately so. Every street corner, every familiar park bench, every unassuming storefront in their old town held ghost memories of David Miller, Sarah's father, haunting reminders of a vibrant life that was no more. Starting over at a new school during senior year was inherently disorienting, like trying to join a complex movie halfway through. Everyone already knew their roles, their groups, their intricate place in the carefully constructed social ecosystem. Sarah had meticulously planned to fly under the radar, to become utterly invisible, to simply graduate quietly, and then to escape, to move on to college, where she could truly start fresh once again, truly fresh this time, without the lingering shadows of the past clinging to her like a shroud. This was exactly the kind of attention she had hoped, desperately hoped, to avoid. Every fiber of her being screamed for anonymity. But today wasn't about fitting in or making new friends or gracefully navigating the treacherous, shark-infested waters of high school politics. Today marked precisely 3 years since the worst day of her life, the day the world had shifted violently on its axis and left her reeling in a void of incomprehensible grief and unimaginable sorrow. Wearing her father's uniform boots was the only way she could feel physically close to him, the only ritual, however odd or unconventional to others, that made the crushing, suffocating weight of his absence bearable, even for a few fleeting hours. They were her armor against a world that suddenly felt too big, too loud, too indifferent to her pain. They were her private vigil, a silent, guttural scream into the void of sorrow and loss that no one else seemed to understand, or perhaps cared to. During third period chemistry class, usually a sanctuary of logical equations, predictable reactions, and the comforting, if sometimes acrid, scent of ethanol, became yet another stage for her public humiliation. Sarah slid into her usual seat at the back, a strategic position she always chose, hoping to blend into the background, to become just another face in a sea of indifferent anonymous students. But Tyler Brooks, a notorious disruptor, a master of calculated chaos, had other plans. Tyler was the kind of student who thrived on disorder, whose natural habitat was any situation ripe for disruption, a self-appointed class clown whose humor often crossed the invisible, unforgivable line into outright cruelty, almost always at the expense of others. He'd been watching Sarah all morning, his eyes gleaming with a predatory glint, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, to initiate his performance, to make her his unwilling co-star. As Mrs. Jenkins, a kind but somewhat oblivious teacher, began explaining complex molecular structures on the whiteboard, her back dutifully turned to the class, Tyler made his move. He stood up abruptly, claiming he needed to sharpen his pencil, a flimsy excuse. Instead, he took a deliberately circuitous route that brought him directly past Sarah's desk. With theatrical precision, a sweeping, exaggerated gesture of his arm, he accidentally knocked her textbook, her meticulously organized notebook, and her pencil case, scattering them across the grimy, scuffed floor. "Oops!" he said loudly, his voice dripping with syrupy, false innocence, a thin veneer over his malicious intent. "Sorry about that. Boom! Kaboom!" He punctuated his words with exaggerated sound effects and wild, flailing gestures, mimicking the chaos and violence of a battlefield, clearly aiming his performance, his mockery, directly at Sarah. The timing was, unfortunately, perfectly orchestrated. Mrs. Jenkins had her back turned, meticulously writing complex formulas on the board, completely oblivious to the cruel drama unfolding just inches behind her. The class erupted in barely contained laughter, a wave of suppressed giggles that quickly swelled into open, uninhibited amusement. Students covered their mouths with their hands, their shoulders shaking with mirth, their eyes glinting with a mixture of complicity and malicious delight. Some weren't even trying to hide their amusement, openly pointing and whispering to their neighbors. Sarah's face burned with humiliation, a hot flush spreading from her neck to her hairline as she bent down to collect her scattered belongings. The large, cumbersome boots, while a source of comfort, paradoxically made the simple task awkward and clumsy, forcing her to stoop lower, exposing her vulnerability even further to their cruel, gleeful gazes. "Careful there, soldier," Tyler whispered, his voice a sibilant hiss as he leaned down, pretending to help, while actually making things worse by nudging her pencil even further under the desk with his foot. "Wouldn't want you to call in an airstrike on the chemistry lab, would we? We're trying to avoid collateral damage, you know." His voice was just loud enough for the surrounding students to hear, and another wave of snickers rippled through the classroom, like a contagion spreading through the rows. Sarah's hands clenched into fists under the heavy fabric of her gown, her knuckles white against the dark, worn leather of the boots. Every fiber of her being, every raw instinct, screamed at her to fight back, to lash out, to defend herself, to make Tyler pay for his casual, calculated cruelty, to wipe the smirk off his face. But she'd learned long ago, the hard way, through countless agonizing experiences, that retaliation only made things worse, only gave bullies more ammunition, more justification to escalate their attacks. So she said nothing, forced herself to swallow the bitter taste of indignity, simply returned to her seat and tried to focus on Mrs. Jenkins's lesson about chemical bonds, though the words seemed to float meaninglessly in the air, disjointed and utterly nonsensical. The whispers continued throughout the period, a constant insidious undercurrent of judgment and speculation. Why is she dressed like that? Is she trying to be edgy? Maybe she's having some kind of breakdown. Each comment, each hushed query felt like a small, precise cut, 1,000 tiny wounds accumulating, bleeding her spirit dry. By the time the bell rang, a merciful signal of the end of the period, Sarah felt utterly drained, emotionally battered, as if she were bleeding from 1,000 invisible, agonizing tiny wounds. She just wanted the day to be over. She just wanted to disappear. Forever. The cafeteria, a sprawling echo chamber of adolescent energy and the clatter of plastic trays, was always a social minefield. On the best of days, navigating its treacherous currents required an intricate understanding of unspoken alliances, shifting territories, and the precise velocity needed to avoid unwanted interactions. Today, however, it felt less like a minefield and more like walking straight into enemy territory, the air thick with an almost palpable anticipation of conflict. Sarah clutched her tray, the plastic cool and unyielding against her clammy palms as she moved through the lunch line. Every step was an acute awareness of the gazes that followed her, the whispers that swirled around her like a venomous fog. The lunch ladies, usually bustling and indifferent, paused their rhythmic serving of mystery meat and limp vegetables, giving her curious, almost pitying looks. Sarah caught Mrs. Evans, the head lunch lady, with her perpetually weary eyes, nudging Mrs. Rodriguez and subtly inclining her head in Sarah's direction. A quick, hushed exchange, a shared glance of quiet disapproval, and then they returned to their duties, leaving Sarah to carry the weight of their unspoken judgment. She found an empty table in the furthest, most isolated corner of the cafeteria, a desolate island in a turbulent sea of conformity. It was as far as possible from the coveted, cacophonous territory claimed by the popular kids, a sprawling, boisterous hub of laughter, loud conversations, and the occasional thrown food item. The isolation was a double-edged sword, a blessing and a curse. It offered a fragile shield against direct confrontation, a temporary reprieve from the cutting remarks and the relentless stares. But it also made her a more obvious target, a beacon of otherness in a sea of aggressively enforced uniformity. Sitting alone, in her graduation gown, with her father's worn combat boots peeking out, Sarah felt like a living monument to difference, an exhibit for public consumption. For a few precious fleeting minutes, she harbored a fragile hope that she might make it through lunch unscathed. She picked at her sandwich, the processed cheese and dry turkey tasteless in her mouth, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond her tray. She tried to ignore the periodic bursts of laughter from nearby tables, the ones that swelled just a little too loudly, the ones that she was certain, with a chilling certainty, were directed at her. The rhythmic clinking of cutlery, the muffled roar of hundreds of conversations, the squeak of sneakers on the linoleum floor, all blended into a disorienting hum, a backdrop to her private torment. She willed herself to become invisible, to dissolve into the background, to just exist without being noticed. But her peace was short-lived, a fragile bubble destined to burst. Jessica appeared at her table like a perfectly manicured storm cloud, her presence bringing with it an immediate drop in the temperature of the room. She was flanked by her usual entourage of meticulously groomed followers, Chloe Martinez and Ashley Kim, standing slightly behind their leader. Their expressions a carefully calibrated mixture of feigned curiosity and barely concealed cruelty. These were the girls who ruled Lincoln High's social hierarchy with iron fists wrapped in designer gloves, their power absolute, their judgments swift and merciless. and they had clearly decided that Sarah's understated yet undeniably defiant choice of footwear was not just an oddity, but a direct challenge to their supreme authority, an insult to the delicate balance of their carefully constructed world. "Look, soldier girl," Jessica began, her voice carrying that particular saccharine tone of fake concern that popular girls had perfected over generations, a tone that promised empathy but delivered only condescension. She slid into the seat directly across from Sarah without invitation, her movements fluid and self-assured, her perfectly applied makeup a flawless canvas of foundation and strategically placed blush, and her artfully tousled blonde hair cascading, in a cascade of manufactured effortlessness, provided a stark, almost painful contrast to Sarah's bare face and simple ponytail. "We get that you're trying to be edgy or whatever, trying to make a statement, but this whole costume thing is getting really old, especially today. It's graduation, not a cosplay convention." The cafeteria, which had been a cacophony of sound moments before, began to quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence. The clatter of trays ceased as students sensed the brewing drama. Phones, as if by magic, appeared in dozens of hands, held discreetly low, but ready to capture whatever spectacle was about to unfold. This was better than any reality TV show. This was real-time, raw high school warfare, and everyone wanted a front-row seat. The air crackled with anticipation, a collective holding of breath. "Maybe you should try shopping at normal stores instead of army surplus," Chloe added with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass, sharp and brittle. Her eyes, usually sparkling with mischievous glee, now held a glint of genuine malice. "I mean, there are so many cute boutiques in town. We could totally take you shopping sometime, help you pick out something actually appropriate." The offer, delivered with such obvious, thinly veiled insincerity, felt less like an invitation and more like a cruel, calculated insult, designed to highlight Sarah's perceived social awkwardness and lack of fashion sense. Ashley Kim, usually the quieter of the trio, nodded enthusiastically, her voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone explaining a complex concept to a small, slow child. "Yeah, like, we're not trying to be mean or anything, Sarah, but you're kind of making everyone uncomfortable. It's like you're trying too hard to be different, you know? It's not cool, it's just awkward." The collective judgment of the cafeteria pressed down on Sarah like a physical weight. Her grip tightened on her plastic fork until her knuckles went white, the flimsy plastic threatening to snap under the pressure. The cafeteria had gone almost completely silent now. Hundreds of eyes were focused on their table, like spectators at a gladiator match, eagerly awaiting the inevitable bloodshed. She could feel the weight of their collective judgment, the hungry anticipation of students who smelled blood in the water, who relished watching a public humiliation unfold. Sarah slowly stood up, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor with a shrill sound that seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence. The movement was deliberate, controlled, each muscle taut with suppressed emotion, but her eyes, when she finally met Jessica's gaze, blazed with an intensity that made Madison's confident smirk falter just slightly. It was a flicker of uncertainty in the Queen's usually unflappable facade. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Sarah said, her voice steady, surprisingly calm, but carrying an undercurrent of something dangerous, something that suggested depths these girls couldn't begin to fathom, experiences they were blissfully ignorant of. Her tone was devoid of anger, yet infused with a quiet power that seemed to ripple through the hushed room. Jessica's smirk returned almost immediately, emboldened by her audience and her own ingrained sense of social invincibility, a shield forged from years of unchallenged popularity. She leaned back in her chair with the casual arrogance of someone who had never faced real consequences for her cruelty, someone who believed herself utterly untouchable. "Oh, please," she said, her voice rising in pitch, ensuring everyone in the cafeteria could hear her cutting remarks. "What are you going to do? Call your daddy to come save you? Or maybe those ugly boots have some kind of secret button to summon him?" Her words, delivered with a smug, triumphant grin, hit Sarah like a physical blow, sharper and more painful than any slap. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Sarah's lips parted, poised to deliver words that would either destroy her completely, exposing the raw, bleeding wound of her grief to the baying crowd, or finally reveal the truth she'd been carrying like a stone in her chest, a truth too heavy for one person to bear alone. The tension was almost unbearable, a vibrating wire stretched to its breaking point. Hook! Intersection of Part 3 and Part 4, just as Sarah opened her mouth, her lips parting to deliver words that would either condemn her to eternal ridicule or shatter the illusion of her silence. A sound unlike anything Lincoln High had ever experienced ripped through the suffocating silence. It began as a distant rumble, barely perceptible beneath the cafeteria's fluorescent hum and the nervous rustle of restless students. But within seconds, it grew into a deafening roar, a monstrous thrum that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The cafeteria windows rattled violently in their frames, sending shivers down spines and causing several students to instinctively duck under their tables, as if bracing for an earthquake. Lunch trays clattered to the floor, forgotten, as the thunderous noise grew louder, more intense, until it felt less like a sound coming from outside and more like a visceral vibration emanating from inside everyone's own chest, a primeval, terrifying pulse. Jessica's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror as she looked around wildly, her perfectly styled hair whipping around her face as she frantically tried to locate the source of the overwhelming, all-consuming noise. "What the hell is that?" Tyler Brooks shouted over the din, but his voice was barely audible above the mechanical roar that now dominated every other sound, drowning out the last vestiges of human chatter. The overhead lights flickered ominously, casting dancing shadows, and somewhere in the distant kitchen, dishes crashed to the floor, a cascade of porcelain and glass. The entire building seemed to vibrate with increasing intensity, a massive, living entity trembling on the brink of collapse. Through the massive, grime-streaked windows that lined the cafeteria's east wall, a gargantuan shadow passed overhead, momentarily eclipsing the afternoon sun and plunging the room into an eerie, temporary darkness. Students pressed their faces against the glass, their phones already out and recording, capturing a sight that belonged in war movies or disaster films rather than the manicured lawns of a suburban high school. It was a vision of raw, untamed power materializing directly above them. A Chinook helicopter, its twin rotors churning the air into a visible maelstrom of dust and displaced leaves, appeared over the school like something wrenched from another dimension, a beast of metal and raw power. The aircraft was enormous, its olive-green hull gleaming ominously in the sunlight as it circled the building with an almost predatory military precision. The distinctive rhythmic thud-thud-thud of its massive rotors created a primal rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the collective pounding heartbeat of every single person watching from below. "Holy," someone whispered, though the words were utterly lost in the overwhelming, soul-shaking noise. "Is that actually happening?" The helicopter completed one full, majestic circle around Lincoln High, its shadow briefly encompassing the entire campus before banking sharply and beginning its descent toward the football field. Students abandoned their half-eaten lunches without a second thought, chairs scraping and toppling as hundreds of teenagers, gripped by an insatiable curiosity and a primal fear, rushed toward the windows and exits, desperate to get a closer look. Teachers tried desperately to maintain some semblance of order, their voices hoarse and strained against the mechanical roar, but even they were craning their necks, pulling out their own phones to capture the unprecedented scene unfolding outside. "Everyone stay calm. Please remain in your seats." Mrs. Jenkins's voice was barely audible as she tried to corral her students, but her own eyes were wide with a mixture of amazement and fear as she watched the military aircraft, a colossal metal beast, descend gracefully toward the 50-yard line. But her words fell on deaf ears, swallowed by the deafening roar of the rotors. The cafeteria had erupted into controlled chaos, a swirling eddy of bodies and frantic movements, as students pushed and shoved toward the exits, desperate to get outside and witness whatever was happening on the football field. Jessica and her crew, momentarily stripped of their social armor, were swept along with the surging crowd, their earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed confusion and a growing sense that they had stumbled into something far, far bigger than a simple lunch period confrontation, something that defied their understanding of their carefully ordered world. Sarah remained frozen at her table, a silent, still point in the swirling maelstrom of bodies, watching the helicopter through the window as it settled onto the football field with practiced, almost delicate precision. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel its frantic rhythm in her throat, a frantic drumbeat of dread and dawning comprehension. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a growing recognition. She knew that aircraft, knew the distinct unit markings painted on its side, knew exactly why it was here and what its presence truly meant for her. The helicopter's engines began to wind down, the deafening roar slowly subsiding into a powerful hum, but the massive rotors continued spinning, creating lingering gusts of wind as figures in crisp military dress uniforms emerged from the aircraft. Even from a distance, Sarah could make out the sharp lines of their formal attire, the gleam of polished brass buttons, and the muted shimmer of ribbons and metals that told silent stories of service, sacrifice, and unimaginable courage. A sharp breath caught in her throat as she recognized one of the figures stepping onto the field, tall, authoritative, with a distinguished mane of silver hair visible beneath her military cap. Colonel Eleanor Vance, her father's former commanding officer, the woman who had delivered the news that had changed Sarah's life forever 3 agonizing years ago. Principal Thompson's voice crackled over the intercom system, cutting through the excited chatter and frantic speculation that now filled the hallways. His usually calm, measured demeanor was utterly replaced by barely controlled amazement, a tremor of disbelief in his voice as he made an announcement that would be remembered long after graduation day, long after the memories of pop quizzes and football games had faded. "Attention, students and faculty!" His voice echoed through the building, still competing with the lingering whir of the helicopter rotors outside. "We have an unusual situation developing on our campus. Sarah, please report to the main office immediately. I repeat, Sarah to the main office." The announcement hit the crowd like an electric shock, a collective jolt of pure disbelief. Hundreds of heads turned toward Sarah, who was still standing motionless in the cafeteria, her father's oversized boots suddenly feeling both too big and too small at the same time, grounding her while also making her feel utterly exposed. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the crowd like wildfire, more frantic now, more speculative. "Sarah, who's that? The girl in the army boots? What did she do? Is she in trouble? Why is the military here?" For her, Jessica's face had gone utterly pale, drained of all color. Her earlier bravado evaporated, dissolving into thin air as the terrifying implications of the situation began to sink in, chilling her to the bone. The girl she had been mocking, the target of her cruel jokes about calling her daddy to save her, was somehow intimately connected to the military helicopter that had just landed on their school's football field. Tyler Brooks, who had been so gleeful in chemistry class, now looked like he might be violently ill. His face was a sickly green color as the horrifying realization dawned on him. His battlefield sound effects and explosion jokes might have been directed at someone with actual, profound military connections. His casual cruelty now felt monstrously, impossibly large. As Sarah began walking toward the main office, the crowd parted before her like the Red Sea, a path forming in the churning mass of students. Students who had been laughing at her just minutes before now watched in stunned, respectful silence, their phones, once weapons of ridicule, now tools of stunned documentation, capturing every step of her solemn journey through the hallways. The combat boots that had seemed so out of place that morning now sounded different against the linoleum floor. Not awkward or attention-seeking, but purposeful, meaningful, resonating with a quiet authority. Teachers emerged from their classrooms, drawn by the commotion and the continuing hypnotic hum of helicopter rotors outside. Even the most jaded faculty members, those who had seen everything in their decades of education, stood in doorways with expressions of undisguised amazement and raw curiosity. This was unprecedented, extraordinary, the kind of event that would be talked about for years to come, a legend born in real time. Through the large windows that lined the main hallway, Sarah could see more military personnel emerging from the Chinook. They moved with the precise, coordinated efficiency of people accustomed to ceremony and protocol, their movements crisp and economical. A small, disciplined crowd of soldiers formed on the football field, their dress uniforms immaculate despite the lingering wind from the still spinning rotors. Jessica and her friends followed at a distance, no longer the confident queens of the school, but uncertain, wide-eyed observers of something they clearly didn't understand. Their earlier mockery had been replaced by a growing, sickening sense of dread, a chilling realization that they might have made a terrible, unforgivable mistake. The girl they had dismissed as attention-seeking as an oddity was walking toward a meeting with high-ranking military officials who had arrived by helicopter, and the terrifying, profound implications of that fact were beginning to dawn on them with a crushing weight. "What do you think is happening?" Chloe whispered to Jessica, her voice small and uncertain, a stark contrast to her usual confident tone. Jessica didn't answer. She couldn't. For the first time in her entire high school career, perhaps even in her life, she was completely out of her depth. She was watching events unfold that were utterly beyond her understanding or control. The social hierarchy that had seemed so important, so unshakable just minutes before, suddenly felt trivial, meaningless, dissolving into insignificance in the face of whatever powerful, unknown force was now at play on the football field. As Sarah approached the main office, she could see Colonel Eleanor Vance through the window, standing tall and dignified in her crisp dress uniform, her silver hair pulled back in a neat regulation bun. The woman who had been present for the worst, most devastating moment of Sarah's life, the moment her world shattered, was here, in her high school, carrying something that would change everything once again. The anticipation was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. She pushed through the double doors, the sound of the helicopter a distant thrum now, and stepped into the quiet sanctity of the office, ready for whatever came next. The principal's office, usually a bastion of stern authority and hushed reprimands, felt strangely tranquil after the storm of the cafeteria. The thick carpet absorbed the last vestiges of the helicopter's fading hum, leaving an almost unnerving silence. Sarah stood before Principal Thompson's imposing oak desk, the air around her thick with a mixture of anticipation and lingering grief. Principal Thompson, usually a man of meticulous order and carefully chosen words, seemed uncharacteristically flustered. His usually neat tie was slightly askew, and his gaze kept darting towards the window, where the massive silhouette of the Chinook still dominated the football field. He gestured nervously to a chair. "Sarah, please, have a seat." Sarah sat, her father's boots making a soft, almost reverent thud against the plush carpet. She kept her gaze fixed on the principal, trying to decipher the uncharacteristic tension etched onto his face. He cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "Sarah, this is quite unprecedented. We've never had a military presence of this nature on campus, let alone on graduation day. Colonel Vance requested to speak with you directly. She's on her way here now." His voice trailed off, a hint of awe mixing with his bewilderment. He seemed to want to ask 1,000 questions, but professional decorum, or perhaps a sudden respect for the gravity of the situation, held his tongue. A moment later, the office door opened and Colonel Eleanor Vance entered. She filled the doorway, her presence immediately commanding the small space. Her crisp dress uniform, adorned with a dazzling array of ribbons and medals, spoke volumes of a distinguished career. Her silver hair, pulled back in a severe regulation bun, framed a face that was weathered but kind, her eyes sharp and intelligent, yet softened with an unspoken empathy as they met Sarah's. She carried a polished wooden presentation case in one hand, its surface gleaming under the office lights. "Sarah," Colonel Vance said, her voice deep and clear, resonating with an authority that brooked no argument, yet surprisingly gentle. She extended a hand to Principal Thompson. "Principal, thank you for facilitating this. My apologies for the dramatic arrival. Circumstances required it." Principal Thompson, still somewhat awestruck, merely nodded, gesturing to the colonel to take the seat opposite Sarah. Colonel Vance sat down, placing the wooden case carefully on the corner of the desk. Her gaze, warm and steady, settled on Sarah. "Sarah, it's been a long time," she began, a faint smile touching her lips, a shared understanding passing between them. 3 years! You've grown. But I recognize the same quiet strength in your eyes." Her eyes flickered down to Sarah's boots. "And I see you're still honoring your father in your own way. He would have been incredibly proud." A lump formed in Sarah's throat. No one outside her immediate family had ever spoken about her father with such reverence, such direct understanding of her grief. Most people offered platitudes or simply avoided the topic altogether. Colonel Vance, however, spoke with the weight of shared experience, the unspoken camaraderie of those who had served alongside him. "Today, Sarah, is a difficult day for you, I know," Colonel Vance continued, her voice softening slightly. "It's the anniversary of Staff Sergeant Daniel Miller's ultimate sacrifice." Sarah nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, quickly wiped away. "But it's also a day of profound honor for him and for you." Colonel Vance paused, her gaze sweeping across Principal Thompson, who was now leaning forward, captivated, and then back to Sarah. "As his commanding officer, I had the immense privilege of serving alongside your father. Daniel was exceptional, not just a soldier, but a true leader, a communications specialist who could always find a way to get the message through, no matter how dire the circumstances. He was the kind of man who would always put his team first, always." She opened the wooden presentation case with a soft click. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, lay a folded American flag, its red, white and blue fabric crisp and perfect, and a smaller, intricately carved wooden box. The items seemed to glow with an inner light, radiating significance. "When your father's convoy was ambushed outside Kandahar 3 years ago," Colonel Vance's voice grew somber. "They were cut off, pinned down under heavy fire. 12 men were trapped, their lives hanging by a thread. Daniel, without hesitation, left the relative safety of his armored vehicle. He knew they needed a secure comms link to call for extraction, to bring rescue to his trapped comrades. He established that link, Sarah. He fought his way through a barrage of enemy fire, through a storm of bullets to get that message out. Her voice was now filled with a deep, quiet respect, almost a reverence. He was killed by sniper fire while completing that mission. But because of his actions, because he put those men, those lives, above his own safety, all 12 members of his unit were saved. They walked away because of him. Sarah listened, her chest aching with a familiar yet intensified grief. She knew this story, every painful detail, but hearing it articulated by the very woman who had witnessed its aftermath, who had been there, gave it a new, almost unbearable weight. Her father's dog tags, hidden beneath her gown, felt heavy against her chest, a cold metallic comfort. His daughter, Sarah, Colonel Vance continued, her gaze unwavering, has honored his memory every year on this date by wearing his boots. She has carried his legacy with quiet dignity, never seeking attention or recognition, simply remembering a father who died serving something greater than himself, something greater than all of us. Colonel Vance picked up the folded flag. Today we are here to present you with 2 items that have been a long time coming. First, this flag. This flag flew over the forward operating base where your father served and died. It was lowered to half staff in his honor the day we lost him, and it has been waiting for the right moment to be presented to his family. She gently placed the flag into Sarah's trembling hands. The weight of it was somehow both lighter and heavier than Sarah had expected. Lighter in its physical mass, yet heavier with the immense burden of history, of lives, of sacrifices it represented. The fabric felt soft but substantial, and she could almost feel the history it carried, the lives it represented, the sacrifices it symbolized. And second, Colonel Vance opened the smaller wooden box, revealing a medal that caught the sunlight from the window and seemed to radiate its own inner light, its bronze and enamel gleaming with an undeniable aura of profound courage. The Medal of Honor, our nation's highest military decoration, which was posthumously awarded to Staff Sergeant Daniel Miller for his extraordinary heroism and selfless sacrifice. It is a testament to valor beyond the call of duty. Sarah's breath hitched. She had known about the Medal of Honor, had seen the official papers, but to see it, gleaming, tangible, was overwhelming. Tears streamed down her face, unbidden, blurring her vision. She made no move to wipe them away. They were tears of grief, yes, but also of profound pride, of a quiet vindication. Suddenly, a cacophony erupted outside the principal's office. The subdued curiosity of the students had burst its banks. The sound of thousands of voices swelled, no longer whispers, but a roar of excited, astonished chatter. Students had pushed past the teachers trying to corral them, surging towards the football field, desperate to witness the unfolding scene. The entire school, it seemed, had gathered, along with countless parents and faculty members. What had started as curious students sneaking out of classrooms had become a mass exodus as teachers, administrators, and even cafeteria workers joined the unprecedented assembly. The massive Chinook helicopter sat like a sleeping giant on the 50-yard line, its rotors finally still, but its imposing presence commanded absolute attention from the nearly 2,000 people who now formed a massive semicircle around the aircraft. Principal Thompson, usually the picture of school authority, now stood nervously beside Colonel Vance, his usual gravitas diminished in the presence of the decorated military officer, whose chest displayed ribbons and medals that spoke of decades of service and unimaginable sacrifice. The colonel's silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun beneath her dress cap, and her bearing radiated the kind of quiet, unwavering confidence that came from leading soldiers through impossible situations. Sarah emerged from the school building, flanked by Colonel Vance and 2 junior officers, their polished shoes clicking in perfect synchronization against the concrete walkway that led to the field. The crowd parted before them like the Red Sea, a living curtain of stunned faces. Hundreds of eyes turned to track her movement, expressions ranging from sheer curiosity to awe to a dawning, profound comprehension. The girl who had been mocked and ridiculed just hours before now walked with the quiet dignity of someone being escorted to receive the highest honors. Jessica stood frozen near the bleachers, her face ashen, drained of all color. The cruel words she had spoken in the cafeteria, "Call your daddy to come save you," echoed in her mind like a haunting curse, mocking her own earlier arrogance. Beside her, Mark Jensen looked like he might collapse. His earlier jokes about explosions and airstrikes now seemed not just inappropriate, but monstrously, unforgivably cruel. The magnitude of his casual callousness was crushing him. Colonel Vance stepped forward as Sarah approached, her voice carrying clearly across the silent field through a portable microphone that one of her aides had quickly set up. The sound system crackled to life, and when she spoke, her words reached every corner of the assembled crowd, silencing even the most restless among them. "Ladies and gentlemen, students and faculty of Lincoln High School," she began, her voice steady and commanding, cutting through the last vestiges of murmuring. 3 years ago today, on October 15th, Staff Sergeant Daniel Miller made the ultimate sacrifice while serving his country in Afghanistan. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the magnitude of the moment began to sink in. This wasn't a drill or a demonstration or some kind of educational program. This was real, deeply personal, and heartbreaking in ways that most of these teenagers, sheltered in their suburban bubble, had never experienced. Colonel Vance continued, her voice growing stronger, imbued with a deep, personal reverence as she spoke about a man she had clearly respected and admired beyond measure. Sergeant Miller was a communication specialist, a father, and a hero who put the lives of his fellow soldiers above his own safety, above all else. When the convoy came under heavy fire, he left the relative safety of his armored vehicle, knowing full well the risks, to establish a communication link that would bring rescue to his trapped comrades. He was killed by sniper fire while completing that mission, but his actions saved 12 lives. Sarah stood at attention beside the colonel, tears streaming silently down her face as she listened to the story she knew by heart, but had never heard told to such a vast public audience. Her father's dog tags, hidden beneath her gown, felt heavy against her chest, and the worn boots that had seemed so awkward and out of place that morning now felt like armor, protecting her from the weight of everyone's gazes, from the sheer enormity of the moment. His daughter, Sarah, the colonel gestured toward her, her hand resting briefly, gently, on Sarah's shoulder, has honored his memory every year on this date by wearing his boots. She has carried his legacy with quiet dignity, never seeking attention or recognition, simply remembering a father who died serving something greater than himself, something greater than any of us. The silence on the field was absolute now, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the occasional sniffle from someone in the crowd. Even the most cynical seniors, the ones who prided themselves on being too cool to care about anything, stood transfixed by the unfolding ceremony, their hardened exteriors melting away under the sheer emotional weight of the moment, under the vast unblinking sky. The silence that fell over the football field was absolute, a profound hush broken only by the distant, almost ghostly hum of suburban traffic and the occasional hushed sniffle from someone in the crowd. It was a silence so complete, so reverent, that it seemed to absorb all sound, all movement, drawing the nearly 2,000 people gathered into a shared, suspended moment of breathtaking solemnity. Even the most cynical seniors, those who prided themselves on their unshakable cool, on being too aloof to care about anything, stood transfixed. Their hardened exteriors seemed to melt away under the sheer emotional weight of the unfolding ceremony, their eyes wide, their expressions stripped bare of pretense. Colonel Eleanor Vance reached into the polished wooden presentation case that one of her aides, a young Marine in an impeccably pressed dress uniform, held open. From it, she withdrew a perfectly folded American flag. Its red, white, and blue fabric was crisp and unblemished, each fold precise, each star sharp against the deep blue canton. It looked as though it had just been freshly pressed, untouched by the winds of war, yet Sarah knew the truth of its journey. This flag was not merely a piece of cloth, it was a tangible piece of history, a silent witness to sacrifice. Today, we are here to present Sarah with 2 items that have been a long time coming, the Colonel announced, her voice resonating with the solemn dignity that carried across the vast expanse of the field. First, this flag. She lifted it gently, the fabric unfurling slightly in the light breeze, a vivid splash of color against the green field. This flag flew over the forward operating base in Afghanistan, where Staff Sergeant Daniel Miller served, and where he ultimately made his final sacrifice. It was solemnly lowered to half staff in his honor on the very day we lost him, a somber tribute to his profound courage. For 3 years it has been safeguarded, waiting patiently for this exact moment, the right time to be presented to his family, to his daughter, Sarah, with practiced grace and a tenderness that belied her stern military bearing. Colonel Vance turned and placed the meticulously folded flag into Sarah's trembling hands. The weight of it was both lighter and heavier than Sarah had expected. Lighter in its physical mass, a mere piece of cloth, yet immeasurably heavier with the immense burden of history, of lives lived, of battles fought, of sacrifices consecrated. The fabric felt soft against her skin, yet substantial, tangible, and she could almost feel the echoes of the wind that had once whipped it over a barren, distant land. She could almost sense the countless lives it represented, the unspoken prayers, the tears shed, the ultimate price symbolized by its red stripes and white stars. Clutched in her grasp, the flag was a powerful, silent narrative of loss and unwavering loyalty. And second, Colonel Vance continued, her voice gaining a new, almost luminous quality, she opened the smaller, intricately carved wooden box that rested within the presentation case. Inside, nestled on a bed of rich, dark velvet, lay a medal. It caught the afternoon sunlight, refracting it into a blinding burst of brilliance, seeming to radiate its own inner light, its bronze and enamel gleaming with an undeniable aura of profound courage, of valor almost beyond human comprehension. The intricate details of its design, the eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch, the shield, all spoke of power and peace intertwined. "The Medal of Honor," Colonel Vance declared, her words echoing across the silent field, imbued with the full weight of its significance. "Our nation's highest military decoration." This medal was posthumously awarded to Staff Sergeant Daniel Miller for his extraordinary heroism and selfless sacrifice. It is a testament to valor beyond the call of duty, a recognition that his actions on that fateful day transcend all expectations of courage and commitment. The crowd, which had been holding its collective breath, erupted not in the casual, polite clapping of a typical school assembly, but in a spontaneous, thunderous wave of applause that swelled from the field and rolled towards the stage like a breaking storm. This was something deeper, far more reverent, the kind of applause reserved for moments that transcended ordinary human experience, for acts of heroism that defied comprehension. Students who had never given a single thought to military service, whose worlds revolved around social media and pop culture, found themselves wiping away unbidden tears, their faces streaked with emotion. Teachers who had witnessed decades of graduations and countless ceremonies stood in awe, transfixed by something unprecedented, something that touched their souls in a way no academic achievement ever could. The applause was a cascade of respect, a tangible outpouring of belated understanding and profound admiration, as Colonel Vance, her eyes shining with unshed tears, pinned the gleaming Medal of Honor to Sarah's graduation gown, symbolically, to the very heart of the uniform her father had worn, and she now wore his boots. She leaned close and whispered something that only Sarah, amidst the roaring applause, could hear. Her voice was soft, husky with emotion, yet firm and clear. "He would be so incredibly proud of the woman you've become, Sarah. His courage lives on in you, strong, resilient, just like him." The words, a private benediction, landed in Sarah's heart, a balm to the wounds of grief and ridicule. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence that seemed to stretch into eternity, a profound hush that settled over the field even as the thunderous applause faded. 2,000 people, gathered together, stood in solemn unified honor of a man most of them had never heard of until that very day. When that sacred moment ended, the spell was broken. But something fundamental had changed, subtly yet irrevocably, in the atmosphere of Lincoln High School. The very air around them felt different, infused with a new gravity, a deeper understanding. The echoes of laughter from earlier in the day were now replaced by the solemn weight of newfound respect. The transformation was immediate and palpable. The girl in the combat boots was no longer an object of ridicule or curiosity. She was a living testament, a tangible link to a profound act of heroism, a stark reminder that some stories run far deeper than superficial appearances. Her silence throughout the day had not been weakness, but dignity. Her defiance in wearing the boots had not been a cry for attention, but a quiet, unwavering act of love. The students, many still wiping tears from their eyes, now saw not an outcast, but a survivor, a daughter of a true hero. The school, once a microcosm of social hierarchies and teenage drama, had been momentarily elevated, touched by the raw, undeniable truth of sacrifice and valor. The profound hush that fell over the Lincoln High football field was unlike anything anyone present had ever experienced. It was a sacred silence, thick and heavy, replacing the thunderous applause that had just erupted. 2,000 people, gathered together under the vast, unblinking sky, stood in solemn, unified honor of a man most of them had never even heard of until that very day. It was a moment of collective introspection, a shared acknowledgement of sacrifice that transcended the usual boundaries of age, social status, and petty teenage preoccupations. When that sacred moment ended, gently, like the last dying echo of a distant bell, the spell was broken. But something fundamental had shifted, subtly yet irrevocably, in the very atmosphere of Lincoln High School. The air itself felt different, infused with a new gravity, a deeper understanding, a palpable sense of shared humanity that had been conspicuously absent just moments before. The lingering echoes of laughter and cruel whispers from earlier in the day were now completely replaced by the solemn weight of newfound respect, a palpable reverence that hung heavy around the quiet girl in the combat boots. The transformation was immediate and palpable, radiating outward from the stage where Sarah still stood, clutching the flag and the Medal of Honor. The girl who just hours earlier had been an object of ridicule, a quirky anomaly, a figure of curious amusement, was now something entirely different. She was a living testament, a tangible link to a profound act of heroism, a stark, undeniable reminder that some stories run far deeper than superficial appearances. Her silence throughout the day had not been weakness, but dignity. Her defiance in wearing the boots had not been a desperate attention-seeking cry, but a quiet, unwavering act of love, a profound expression of grief and remembrance, a private vigil made public. The students, many still wiping tears from their eyes, now saw not an outcast, not a weird girl, but a survivor, a daughter of a true hero, a figure worthy of awe. The school, once a microcosm of strict social hierarchies and petty teenage dramas, had been momentarily elevated, touched by the raw, undeniable truth of sacrifice and valor, a moment of grace. Tyler Brooks, stripped bare of his usual swagger and obnoxious bravado, was the first to approach Sarah as the massive crowd began to disperse. The orderly unraveling of the enormous semicircle was slow, almost reverent. Tyler walked with slumped shoulders, his gaze fixed on the ground, his usually confident stride replaced by a tentative, almost fragile demeanor. His face, typically a mask of mischievous insolence, was now streaked with unshed tears, leaving faint glistening trails. His voice, usually loud and booming, was a barely audible whisper, thick with genuine remorse, raw and unpracticed. He stopped directly in front of Sarah, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Sarah," he began, his voice cracking, a clear testament to the emotional turmoil churning within him. I'm so incredibly sorry." He swallowed hard, visibly struggling to form the words, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Your dad, Staff Sergeant Miller, he was a real hero. A real hero. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." He finally managed to lift his gaze, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a raw, desperate shame, a profound regret that seemed to consume him. "I'm so sorry for what I said. For what I did in chemistry class, the jokes, the sounds, the way I acted, it was unforgivable. I feel like a complete idiot." He flinched, almost imperceptibly, as if bracing himself for an angry retort, a scathing rebuke, or even a physical blow ready to accept any punishment. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her gaze steady, unwavering, holding the weight of his confession. She saw not the obnoxious class clown who had tormented her, but a 17-year-old boy, stripped bare of his usual defenses, vulnerable and exposed. He had just learned a profound, painful lesson about consequences and respect, a lesson delivered with a force he could never have anticipated. She saw the genuine pain in his eyes, the dawning, horrifying understanding that his casual cruelty had been directed at something sacred, something untouchable. She didn't smile. Her face remained somber, but her eyes softened infinitesimally, a flicker of understanding replacing the coldness she had worn as armor all day. "He was," she said simply, her voice quiet but firm, carrying the undeniable weight of truth. She clutched the folded flag tighter, her fingers tracing the sharp creases of the fabric, a grounding sensation. "And now you know why I wear these boots, Tyler. Not for attention, not for drama, not to be edgy or different." Her gaze met his, unwavering, but to remember that heroes are real, and sometimes they're closer than you think. And sometimes the stories behind people, the battles they're fighting, aren't what they seem on the surface. They're complex, they're painful, they're sacred. Her words were not accusatory, not a condemnation, but rather a quiet, profound instruction, a gentle challenge for him to grow, to learn, to see the world with more empathy. Tyler simply nodded, unable to speak, the shame and sorrow too great for words. Tears continued to stream down his face, a silent, eloquent testament to the impact of the revelation. He mumbled another apology, barely audible, then turned and walked away, his shoulders still slumped, heading for the edge of the field, a visibly transformed figure, his previous arrogance utterly shattered. Next, it was Jessica's turn. Her usual posture of effortless superiority, her aura of unshakable confidence, had completely evaporated, leaving her looking small and diminished. The girl who had ruled the school's social hierarchy with casual cruelty and a dismissive flick of her perfectly manicured hand, now stood hunched, her gaze fixed intently on her expensive ballet flats, as if seeking solace in their polished surface. Chloe and Ashley stood a few paces behind her, looking equally humbled and uncertain, their own carefully constructed facades crumbling around them, mirroring their leader's profound discomfort. "Sarah, Jessica started, her voice barely a whisper, a stark, almost shocking contrast to the booming confidence she usually exuded. Her voice cracked, betraying her profound emotional distress. She stopped, seemingly unable to find words adequate to the moment, to the enormity of her cruelty, to the public humiliation she was now experiencing. Her earlier bravado, her cutting remarks about Sarah calling her daddy to save her, now hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, suffocating her with shame and regret. I said terrible things about your father, things no one should ever say. I truly didn't know. I was so wrong." A tear escaped, then another, streaking mascara down her perfectly made-up cheek, a visible crack in her once impenetrable facade. "You didn't ask," Sarah replied, her voice holding no anger, no bitterness, no trace of the vengeful satisfaction she might have felt. It was only a quiet, profound sadness that resonated with the immense weight of her grief. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, holding Jessica's, forcing her to confront the impact of her words. "You saw someone different, Jessica. Someone who didn't fit into your idea of what a graduation should look like. Someone whose way of coping, whose way of remembering, didn't align with your expectations. And you decided that made them a target. You decided my boots were a joke, a reason to make me feel small." Sarah paused, allowing the full gravity of her words to sink in, her voice never raising but gaining an undeniable power. "Maybe next time you'll think about what you don't know, about the invisible burdens people carry, about the profound unspoken stories hidden behind a different appearance, before you decide to hurt someone." Her words were a quiet rebuke, a gentle but firm challenge, devoid of malice but overflowing with an undeniable, unassailable truth. Jessica's eyes welled up, overflowing with tears of shame and a dawning understanding. She nodded, unable to meet Sarah's gaze, utterly diminished, her social armor completely shattered. She mumbled a choked apology, barely intelligible through her sobs, then turned, walking away with her friends, a silent procession of humbled former queens, their reign effectively ended. As the massive Chinook helicopter prepared for its departure, its powerful rotors spinning up once again, the familiar hum slowly building to a deafening roar that vibrated through the ground, students began to understand that they had not just witnessed a ceremony, but a profound, life-altering event that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The air vibrated with the raw power of the aircraft, but also with the lingering echoes of the ceremony, the immense weight of the story that had just unfolded. The girl in the combat boots was no longer an object of mockery, no longer a quirky anomaly. She was a living, breathing reminder that everyone carries stories, often invisible ones, stories of profound loss, of unbreakable resilience, of unimaginable meaning. She was a testament that heroism exists not just in textbooks and war movies, but in the real world, in the quiet sacrifices made by ordinary people, and in the enduring quiet dignity of those left behind to carry their legacy. And that sometimes the very people we dismiss or ignore, the ones who don't fit into our neat little boxes, are connected to something far, far greater than high school social hierarchies, far greater than fleeting popularity or superficial judgments. Sarah stood on the football field long after the Chinook had lifted off, a powerful surge of wind whipping her graduation gown around her, long after its formidable silhouette had disappeared into the vast, pale afternoon sky. She clutched her father's Medal of Honor, its weight a comforting anchor in her palm, and the folded American flag, its crisp folds now slightly softened by the warmth of her hands. In that moment, surrounded by the fading echoes of a day that had changed everything, she felt his presence more strongly, more vividly, more tangibly than she had since the day he died. It was not a haunting presence, but a guiding, loving one, a warmth that enveloped her, a quiet strength that infused her very being. Around her, Lincoln High School was forever changed. The meticulously ordered social ecosystem, once so rigid and seemingly unshakable, had been profoundly shaken, its superficial foundations exposed by a sudden, undeniable truth. The laughter and whispers had ceased, replaced by a quiet, collective respect that would linger in the hallways and classrooms for years to come. Sarah knew that when she wore his boots again, which she surely would, not just on anniversaries, but whenever she needed his strength, it would be with the understanding and reverence it had always deserved from others, not just from herself. The story of Staff Sergeant Daniel Miller's selfless sacrifice and of his daughter's quiet strength and unwavering dignity would spread far beyond the school, beyond the town, becoming a powerful, enduring legend. It would serve as a poignant reminder that heroes' children walk among us, carrying their parents' legacy with quiet, unwavering pride. Sometimes hidden, sometimes subtly expressed, waiting for a moment, often a dramatic one, for that legacy to truly shine. And in that shining, the world around them might just learn to see a little more clearly, to judge a little less harshly, and to understand a little more deeply. Sarah, the girl in the combat boots, had, in a single unforgettable day, graduated not just from high school, but into a new, profound role. A quiet guardian of a powerful truth, a living testament to unseen courage, a beacon of empathy. The echoes of the Chinook may have faded from the sky, but the reverberations of that day will forever resonate through the halls of Lincoln High. What began as a day of celebration, marked by a quiet act of defiance and merciless ridicule, transformed into a powerful testament to sacrifice, dignity, and the unseen burdens people carry. Sarah, the girl in the combat boots, became a living reminder that heroism isn't confined to battlefields or history books. It walks among us, often in the most unexpected places, hidden beneath the surface of everyday lives. Her father's legacy, once a private sorrow, blossomed into a public lesson, teaching an entire community about empathy, respect, and the profound cost of freedom. This story of courage, compassion, and unexpected revelation is just one example of the incredible narratives that exist all around us, waiting to be shared. It reminds us that every person has a story, often complex and deeply personal, that can change the way we see the world if we only take the time to listen, to understand, and to look beyond what's immediately visible. We saw how a simple pair of boots, a symbol of profound personal grief, could pierce through the superficial layers of high school life and expose a deeper truth about human connection and the enduring power of remembrance. The students of Lincoln High learned a difficult but invaluable lesson about judging others, a lesson delivered not by a textbook, but by a powerful, unforgettable moment of reality. And that's why we at Veteranbiker are dedicated to bringing you these profound stories. We believe in honoring the sacrifices made, in celebrating the quiet strength of individuals, and in finding the extraordinary in the seemingly ordinary. Stories like Sarah's remind us that true heroism comes in many forms, and that the echoes of service continue to shape lives long after the uniforms are put away or the battles are fought. They teach us about resilience, about the bonds of family, and about the deep, often unspoken gratitude we owe to those who have served. We hope Sarah's story resonated with you as deeply as it did with us. We invite you to reflect on the hidden stories in your own life and the lives of those around you. What moments have unexpectedly transformed your perspective? What acts of quiet courage have you witnessed? We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below. Your insights and perspectives enrich our community and help us continue to share meaningful content. If this video moved you, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Veteran Biker. Your support helps us continue our mission of sharing powerful narratives that inspire, educate, and connect us all. We're committed to bringing you more compelling stories from the front lines of life, celebrating the human spirit and honoring those who've walked extraordinary paths. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being a part of our journey. Be sure to check out our other videos appearing on your screen now for more incredible stories. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.